welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. I'm Anirudh Burman, and I'm your host for today's episode on India's urbanization. The quality of Indian cities is going to be critical to India's sustained growth. However, Indian cities are often not well planned. They're coping with problems of rapid urban growth, inefficient use of land, and other resources. As a result, our cities have continued to suffer from problems like unmanageable expansion, lack of adequate housing, slums, and new and emergent problems like air pollution. Key to solving these issues is to solve challenges related to planning. As India has liberalized, Indian cities have become more exposed to market forces. They have also attracted more people from the countryside. However, our planning processes, our master plans, and our building bylaws have not kept pace with these changes. Joining us today to discuss this topic of improving urban planning is Mr. Vidyadhar Phatak. He is one of India's leading urban planners and has over 40 years of professional experience as a planner, and he's conducted research on issues of housing affordability, public land, land-based fiscal tools, and reforming urban planning. He retired from the Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority as its principal chief, Town and Country Planning Division in 2004. He has also been a member of the Planning Commission Task Force on Urban Development and the National Commission on Urbanization. His recent book, Planning for India's Urbanization, is the topic of today's discussion. The book is a collection of essays on urban development based on his observation of the challenges in planning our cities. The essays deal with four important themes facing Indian cities today. First, the links between economic growth and urbanization. The second, the importance of dealing with land as a factor in urban planning and development. The third theme addressed in the book is the question of housing and housing affordability. The fourth and last part of the book looks at issues facing metropolitan governance and planning. Mr. Phatke's insights derive chiefly from his close observation of Mumbai and Maharashtra, but they're also applicable to many other Indian cities, and as we'll find out in this discussion, reflect some persistent pathologies and problems in how we plan our cities. Mr. Phatak, welcome to Interpreting India. Mr. Pathak, you begin your book by talking about the historical evolution of thinking about cities and therefore how to plan them. You note that there are certain axioms that have developed over a period of time that seem to guide urban planning in India. These include efforts to limit the growth of large cities, to limit mixed use, high density areas in cities through instruments like FSI restrictions, and to ensure that land and real estate markets should obey and follow these plans. Now, can you talk about these a little bit in a little bit more detail? And also, why did these ideas take root in India and why have they persisted for so long?
I think it goes back to the colonial period and the reaction to colonial period and particularly the industrialization. And many of our political leaders, etc., were also in UK towards the end of the previous century, and they have seen the situation in British industrial towns like Manchester, Glasgow, parts of London, etc. And the impression that they got is that industrialization and urbanization is not good for India. And Mahatma Gandhi put it in so many words in some of his writings, though a rather bland statement is attributed to him that India lives in villages. But he was quite against industries and the industrialization as well. And that in some form got carried away. The British thinking was also that London is too large and the new towns around London should be developed to manage the growth of London. And that had a big impact on the people who were here leading the urban management. And therefore, the first axiom which emerged was that the first of all, urbanization is not for India, in the early stages of it. Then, even if urbanization is inevitable, the large cities are not necessarily good for India. And their growth should be curbed by diverting the growth to other smaller and medium towns, or by creating new towns around the cities like the London attempted to do. And these became one of the major axioms in the early period of Indian independence, and in some form continues in some manner in later periods as well. So even if urbanization is a essential concomitant of economic growth, the attempts were made to manage it in terms of not having large cities, suppressing their growth, trying to divert it to other areas, build new towns, etc., etc. So that has been the case. And in the process, what was also happening is that the early attempt of planned development, particularly Delhi, Chandigarh, were based on public ownership of land. And that, in a way, became a template of planning, that though the land was not in public ownership and there was a active land market, the planners were almost devoid of this reality of land market, and then they transformed the same plans as was done for Delhi or Chandigarh onto other plans. Naturally, they could not succeed because market continued to react to unrealistic restrictions which the plans were trying to impose.
So, sir, then would it be fair to make the case that a lot of the problems we see in Indian cities are direct outcomes of these models of planning?
Yes, to some extent, yes. And there has been some change in the last 1 decade, that now people don't really talk in terms of cities being bad or something like that. And in fact, government of India has been also having sustained support for planning of large cities, from Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Mission, then to smart cities and PMAY and all those kind of things. So there is a sustained effort to support the urbanization, and not necessarily committed to controlling large city growth. So that's a change now. But in practice, there is a still lurking kind of impression that no, large cities are not so good for India.
Yes, and I think reversing the mode in which we have planned our cities for so long is also going to be difficult because our cities have shaped accordingly. And to now move to a new mode is will have to be built on top of what we've already done for 50, 60 years.
Now that is when there is a dual problem, or dual problem that needs to be addressed. One is that given the growth of our cities are going to expand horizontally, or outward expansion, and at the same time, they would need upward extension in terms of rebuilding the old cities, etc. Because if you are rebuilding old cities, naturally it has to be upward expansion. And both need to be addressed. But somehow our efforts have largely been towards outward expansion and not rebuilding the old cities, because old cities rebuilding is equally important if you don't want excessive spread of the cities.
Absolutely. So I want to come to the issue of expansion and rebuilding old parts of the city in a bit. I wanted to pick your brains and request you to go into some more details about the consequences that we have faced because of the models of urban planning that we adopted early on.
I think the two important tools which were used by planners. One was of maximum density. And maximum density, when you invert the ratio, means minimum land per person or per household. Now, if that minimum land is not affordable to the people because of the high cost of land in urban areas, and then there is a problem, and that is what you see in terms of slums and cities like Mumbai, which have a much higher land prices given the geography of the city. have a larger proportion of slums also. So this is disproportionate to income levels. I mean, nobody would say that Mumbai's poverty levels are higher than the other cities, but Mumbai's proportion of slums is much higher than other cities. The other thing that was used was FSI or FAR, as it's called in Delhi, which says that how much land you need to build 1 square meter of build space. And in a way, it says that if, say, FAR is 2, then for every square meter of build space, you need half a meter of land. Now, if you keep that low, like Mumbai has kept it for a long period at 1, which means for every square meter of construction, you need 1 square meter of land. And again, if the land is expensive, then you get distortions in the market and the problems associated with that. And that is what has been happening in many cities. Those which have land constraint, I mean, those which don't have serious land constraints, like Hyderabad, then the problems are not as severe as they would be in a city like Mumbai. But these two instruments, which have been used without taking cognizance of the market and using those as if they are mathematical things to be included in the master plans, then there is a problem, because both of them in a way affect the market and the supply side of the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And you point out in your book something which I found pretty both interesting and surprising, which is that until the 1960s or the mid 1960s, Mumbai or many parts of Mumbai had higher FSI than in the 1990s. People could build more on the same plot of land in these parts. In the 60s, when the population was lower, the need for building was lower than in the 90s. So you make the point that the FSI in parts of South Mumbai, I think, was 4.5 until 1964. And then by the 1990s, there was a uniform FSI of 1.33, which was introduced citywide. So why was this, and what are the consequences it has had for the city?
Now, in case of Mumbai, I think that reduction in the FSI was firstly, it was on the basis of density, that the new development must be for the lower densities. Now, you can't do that when rent control prevails, where you can't do much about the existing stock of buildings, which were already built at something like 3 to 4 FSI. Then reducing it to 1.66 or 1.33 didn't make sense, but still it was introduced, hoping that the new development will then be of lower density. That was the first aspect. And later, when the regional plan was done in 73, the major idea was to decongest Mumbai. And one of the ways of decongesting was thought to be putting a cap on the FSI, so that buildings are not built at a higher FSI. However, that was not really working in the sense there wasn't much of vacant land available as such. And the buildings that were already built, then government had to find out ways of bypassing that, particularly for reconstructing the rent control buildings and all that. So that happened from 97, 99 onwards. Those policies came in, that where slums are redeveloped or rent control buildings are redeveloped, a different FSI regime came into being, which did not follow this 1.33 business.
Okay. So I think in short, how I understand is that Mumbai has a very specific topography. There is a greater scarcity of land. Added to that, we had laws like rent control and then land ceiling laws. And we compounded those by reducing FSI, which added even more scarcity to the land market.
And then what government did, they used this scarcity as a way of policy tool. And it was deployed for all kinds of things. For redeveloping slums, you gave incentive FSI. For rebuilding the old tenanted buildings, you gave incentive FSI. For building schools and hospitals, you gave incentive FSI. For IT services, you gave uh, incentive FSI. For public parking, creating public parking buildings, multi-storied, you gave incentive FSI. And to top it all, for relocating the buffalo stables, also you gave gave the incentive FSI. So in a way, I think some people said that Mumbai is using FSI as a currency. The things which you would have done with money as incentives or subsidies or what, you started doing it with FSI. And that FSI incentive had its value because to start with, you had created scarcity of development rights. So every additional square meter of development right had a very high value. So it seemed to work, but it was working on the distorted market.
Oh, that's a very important point. And so you make this argument, which I found quite compelling, and I want to hear more from you about this, which is you refer to the term the nationalization of FSI. And you talk about development rights being a property right and there being certain constitutional limitations on what the state can do. So can you explain this idea and this argument in a little bit more detail?
See, in our legal system, even though it's not a fundamental right anymore, it is still a legal right. And the land is defined as including benefits arising out of it. Now, in urban situation, the benefit essentially the right to build upon it. Now, the planners or the town planning legislation is a regulating legislation. It is not a legislation which permits taking away the rights of people. There is no such provision in the town planning law. You can acquire the land, but that's a different proposition. But you cannot take away the development right or some other rights. And what started happening is that by defining the FSI in the master plans, people almost thought that the remaining development rights stand nationalized. And then they introduced these schemes like sale of FSI, purchasable FSI, and all these phrases are being used. And in fact, in case of Mumbai, it so happened that in a state budget, they announced that we will now allow an extra 1.33 FSI and we will charge for that 0.33. And the revenue out of that will be shared 50-50 between the state and the BMC. I mean, they went to an extent where the state government claimed rights on that. Now, this is not the case. What you could do probably is only differentially tax. Suppose you have in a master plan certain areas which have one FSI, certain areas have two, certain areas have three, or something like that. Then you can differentially charge the development charge. That for the first FSI it is X. Then when you go 1 to 2, you have 1.5 times something like that, 2, etc. So you have the right of taxation, but you don't have the notion that the FSI in excess of what is stipulated in master plan belongs to the state, and state can sort of sell it or turn it into that. I mean, what you don't own, you cannot sell. Huh? So that is the fundamental, which is, and unfortunately, this has not been questioned. It was only questioned in Mumbai, and the question was not on the charges, but it was on the idea of giving extra FSI. So the petitioner went to court and said that this extra FSI is going to spoil Mumbai. It will create congestion. It will have problems on infrastructure, this, that, etc. Court said that we will not go into those aspects. Show us the provision which allows you to charge for that extra FSI. And there was no provision in the act, so it was struck down. Of course, it was retrospectively amended, but still, had it been the case where government owned the rights, then court couldn't have done anything. because then it's between the owner and the seller and the purchaser. The courts have nothing to do, but that is not the case. And interestingly, Brazil has that. Brazil has amended its constitution to say that there will be only a basic right of development, which will be with the landowners, and anything above that will be virtually owned by the state, and then state can even auction that. But that is not the situation in our legislative framework.
Before we move on to the other topics, I have one last question on FSI. Again, you make a very interesting point in the book, which is that the fact that Mumbai had low FSI requirements actually may have increased crowding, overcrowding. And if Mumbai had higher FSI limits, it would probably have reduced this problem of overcrowding and density. Can you talk about how the economics of this works? I wanted to get some clarity on that.
There is a recent study done by Sahil Gandhi, who is a professor at the Manchester University. Whether now in the recent past there have been relaxation in FSI, so he has done a study to examine whether it has any beneficial impact on affordability, and he comes out by saying that yes, it did have a beneficial impact on that. Though sort of conceptually it sounds well, but he has with data and all that, he has supported that conceptual assumption. I think this low FSI had different kinds of impacts, that it obstructed the redevelopment. First of all, of the buildings which were built at one FSI. After, say, 15 years, 20-year period, it could have been done that way. And higher FSI is not necessarily leading to higher densities, because over the period, say, for example, in Mumbai in mid-80s, the income started increasing, housing finance improved, access to housing finance improved. Naturally, people were buying bigger houses. Now, if they're buying bigger houses, the density will not proportionately increase. They will not be so. But I think somehow that fixation of FSI with density was so strong that, I think the difficulty is not keeping track of market. When once you say market, people think of cunning developers. That is not market. Market is both the demand side and the supply side and how they're moving. Then you should adjust your planning accordingly. But that is still not happening. And because of that, these things have happened. Now, of course, there is a sudden change that FSI has now become almost 3. So if you have wider road, then you can go up to 3 or 2.5 in the suburbs. Plus, there are many other ways of trying to extract the maximum out of regulation. So some architects can fetch you reasonably high FSI, even if what is apparent in the rules, it's not so high.
That's fascinating. I'd love to continue on this topic, but you cover so much ground in the book. I want to move to other topics as well. One is the issue of expansion or greenfield development, which you also talked about in your opening remarks. And you note in your book that there are broadly 2 strategies that we pursue. One is large-scale land acquisition, which you note has become more difficult over the years. And the other is more consensual or slightly more voluntary, which is town planning schemes, land assembly, and so on. So I want to talk to you a little bit about town planning schemes and different methods of land assembly, especially because now land acquisition has become more expensive, land prices have increased. So why is TPS not being used more commonly? What are the constraints? Is it about the way our institutions are designed, or is it our legislation? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
No, in fact, town planning scheme was the first thing that was introduced in Bombay Presidency in 1915, and also in Madras Presidency in 1920. And some of the areas in Mumbai, Pune, Ahmedabad, they were all products of town planning schemes of that time. Uh, but somehow over the years, uh, they became very long drawn. One town planning scheme would take 15 to 20 years, all kinds of litigations. So slowly, it ran out of steam. But Ahmedabad revived it, in particularly in 1999, by amending the law. And two things that they did was that what the government can extract out of the town planning area for public purposes had a cap put on that you cannot take more than 40% of the land. So, in a way, landowners were assured their 60% of their land will go back to them. So, in a way, they will get the advantages in terms of value, etc., of a planned infrastructure, road network, regular size plot, which is suitable for building as compared to agricultural land holding, etc. And from that point onwards, it started becoming more popular in Gujarat. Now, town planning scheme sometimes it's described as voluntary. It's not that voluntary, because there is no option given to a landowner that nobody can within the town planning scheme area say that I won't join the scheme. And so there, in a way, a very subtle application of eminent domain. It's also taking 40% of your land. And in olden days, what used to happen is that this 40% exaction was not uniformly applied to all landowners. Suppose your original plot goes under road, then it's gone. You will not get anything. But what Gujarat adopted in practice was to spread the distribution of this public land on all landowners almost uniformly. So there was some kind of equity in terms of exacting the land from the landowners. And there is a dual mechanism that for the 40% of the land that you surrender, you will be given compensation. And for the 60% of the land that you retain, its value will go up, because now you are in an urban situation with roads, infrastructure, etc., the value will go up. So you have to contribute by way of betterment charge towards the cost of that town planning scheme. So it was a dual thing. And it was so worked out that that betterment was always more than the compensation that you paid. So it really made a financing sense as well in terms of that. What Gujarat also added was that 15% of the land that you have taken from the landowners can be used as a land bank and sold in the market to raise finances. Now, these innovations of Gujarat, which were done in 1999, were then adopted by Maharashtra as well. But it took a long time. And I think from 2010 or 12, it has become applicable in Maharashtra also. But by that time, the idea of this expansion has become difficult. But also near Navi Mumbai now, town planning schemes are happening. Pune Metropolitan Authority is also doing town planning schemes. And many state governments are now showing interest. Like Rajasthan has adopted a new legislation for land pooling. Tamil Nadu has amended their chapter on land pooling. Kerala is thinking of introducing land pooling. So that, because once you realize that you can't do large scale public acquisition, these ideas will be almost become necessities. So that is happening now in a way. The other side of this expansion is so-called integrated townships. Many state governments have used that, where the developer assembles the land, 100 acres or something like that. And then he comes up with a plan to develop the city, and government basically grants him permission, doesn't provide any financial support or anything. So this is the another version of land assembly. Town planning scheme is also in a way a land assembly, because multiple landowners, you plan the thing. This is something where the private developers carries out that assembly and takes up development. So that has also happened, particularly in Pune. Around Pune, there are many such schemes called integrated townships. Mumbai also has few, but outside Mumbai, on the hinterland of Mumbai, also there. Gujarat also has similar, but not as many as in Maharashtra.
Uh, Thank you for that. I think Delhi also has a land pooling scheme, which I think falls somewhere in between what you're describing as integrated township and land assembly, in the sense that there's a lot of leeway given to the consortium of landowners who can come together to develop the land. And I was just curious to understand, what do you think are the pros and cons of these different models that are being tried? One is your town planning scheme that Gujarat has now pioneered, and the other kind of slightly more consensual land assembly, land aggregation kind of schemes. Do they have certain inherent advantages, disadvantages?
I think the so-called integrated township, where you leave it to the developer to assemble land, I think that will a lot will depend upon the his assessment in terms of how he can assemble land. And in most cases, I think this assembly of land occurs when the landowner doesn't know for what purpose his land is being purchased. So that perception itself gives an advantage to the developer, because he doesn't go and tell that I'm going to develop a new town and therefore I want to buy your land. He does it in a different manner altogether, and that the people who do it are called land aggregators. So he takes the help of those aggregators, slowly builds up those things, then puts it together and goes to government. Now I want to do the. So he gets an advantage in the process, which I think in the economics term one would call is asymmetry of information, because those who sell the land don't know what's going to happen to their land, as compared to the person who is buying, who knows what he wants to do with the land. So that's in a way a market difficulty in a way in terms of this. And so as compared to town planning schemes, the original landowners may not have a fair deal in the process, because he may not get that 60% land and all those kind of things, because developer would not like to do that. He would keep maximum land with himself for sale. And that is how it will be. Of course, now the thing is that what is outside your building has also become important in terms of the consumers' preferences. So developers also now take care of providing nice open spaces and gyms and temples and all kinds of things they provide to the occupants of that gated community. So on one hand, gated community have their own sort of limitations, etc. But on the other hand, you get in the process some public purpose land as well.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. From Greenfield and urban expansion, want to talk to you a little bit about redevelopment related issues. And I think one way the economics of it currently seems to work is that expanding outwards seems to be cheaper and easier than to redevelop already built up parts of the city. So, what can be done to actually make that process easier and cheaper? Are there regulatory choices that we need to be making that we've not done?
I think one of the things to see is that whether there are regulatory barriers to redevelopment, like in Mumbai's case, for example. And how can we do the regulations which are conducive to redevelopment? For example, in Mumbai, even 4, 5 storied buildings are built chick by jaw. There is no separation between buildings, whereas the standard regulations require open space all around the building, on all four sides. Now that makes it extremely difficult, particularly when the plots are also small. So then you have to redesign the regulations so that it becomes facilitating to undertake redevelopment. And of course, the FSI. The rent control, of course, is a big hurdle in that process. So unless there are ways of overcoming that, not much of redevelopment will occur. Now in Mumbai, it is happening only because of big FSI incentive. So as much area that you build for rehabilitation, you get between 50 to 80% of that as floor space for free market sale, without a limit on FSI. So if your total FSI comes out to be 8, 9, 10, doesn't matter. You can build it that. So that is how it is being done in the case of Mumbai. So the question in that case is that when you are rebuilding the, say, inner city at a higher density, the question will be that it will naturally attract more cars because the new buyers will come with their cars. And so how do you manage the area for public purpose? So the give and take has to be between providing higher FSI and at the same time trying to get land for public purpose. And for that, one would need a local area plan. You can't do it as a broad brush master plan for the whole city. You have to do it block by block where such redevelopment is required. And then create a more detailed plan, what they call as form-based code. So you decide the form within which the redevelopment has to occur. And in the process, you can design also. So that is how it needs to be done. I think Government of India is also now supporting state governments to do what is called local area plan for this kind of redevelopment, and also town planning schemes, which is a greenfield expansion. So there is a movement on that, but not really mainstream in terms of a big policy push for the city.
So I think we are running out of time. So I will ask a couple of questions, and this is leading.
I'll give short answers.
No, please give these extended answers. Very helpful. So when we talked about redevelopment, what you're impliedly saying is that we actually need a lot more focus, and the intensity of planning has to actually increase, which is counterintuitive to the idea that we should let market forces dominate. So if you actually want to let the market forces work well, you need to plan better and much more contextually and locally. And I wanted to get your sense of whether you think the planning profession, the planning curriculum is actually gearing up well to do this, and what are the challenges within the profession itself that need to be overcome to do this better.
No, I think the planning profession planning professionals in a way are getting divided between the public sector planners and the private sector planners. When I joined planning profession, it was only public sector planners, which is not the case now. And the public sector planners are tied down to the statutory processes which are laid down in the Act to do plans. And there also what is happening, not so much in Maharashtra or Gujarat, they find it difficult to get planners to do city level plans adequately. Particularly the things like assessing the market, assessing the housing market, etc. So what they have chosen to do is to prepare state-wide regulations. So the state has uniform regulations for all cities in the state, including things which are market sensitive or specific to a city, like FSI regime or parking requirements. Now, parking requirements of Sangli and Mumbai cannot be the same. You got to differentiate. So that is not happening, and in a way they are choosing a easier way to come out of this. So that is one aspect of what happens in statutory planning that takes place. And the other part is that once the plan is done, the attention moves to the regulatory aspects, granting permission, and not implementing the plan in the sense that you obtain the land for public purposes. Because what the plan divides the city into public realm and private realm. So that public realm has to be carved out of private ownership and then develop, whether roads, gardens, schools, whatever that you want to do. And this has been lagging across the cities. But whereas the concentration is on development permissions, most of the people are engaged in that granting development permission. In terms of education, what has happened is the most of the planners are architects and engineers, and these are essentially design oriented professionals. They want a product to be designed, and they are not sensitive to the processes that lead to a particular status in the city, like the land market, for example, or there may be other social aspects also. That is one aspect, and most of the planning schools are run as design schools. They are not in the universities as such. Multidisciplinary universities don't have planning program. Schools of planning and architecture started in Delhi. That was the first formal planning, but it was planning and architecture. And then it has been repeated in some other cities as well. And in most of the cases, these are architecture and planning schools. So they are design oriented. And the students are also largely architects and engineers. Though they say that we can also take economists and sociologists and geographers and all that. Hardly any economist nowadays, at least, goes and joins the planning program. Now, that is one difficulty. And to train planners within 4 semesters is a big challenge, because planning spreads out in so many disciplines in a way, and familiarity with so many things is required. And then it is 3 semesters with 1 thesis semester. So that even squeezes the scope for doing this. The other aspect is that the most planning schools have now divided their programs according to specialization. There is urban planning, there is housing, there is transportation, there is infrastructure, there is environment, etc., etc. So it has expanded in almost all planning schools in that fashion. So what you get is a specialized planner. But what you need is not a specialized planner. When you look at the city, you can't carry the baggage of specialization. You have to look at the city as a whole in terms of systems or whatever. But that is difficult to resolve, because I think this is the age of specialization, and that super specialization in a way might continue as well. So those are the problems in terms of how the profession would shape in next 10, 12 years. And the other part of that is the non-statutory planners are usually with consultants. And the kind of consultancy that they provide is in a way a little mysterious. So that also has its impact. And I think some of the schools now have majority of their planners joining the private sector consulting firm.
Thank you so much for this. This has been a really informative, insightful conversation, and it was a real pleasure to read your book. I learned a lot from this, and I would deeply encourage all the listeners to try and get a copy of Mr. Phatak's book both for the issues that we talked about, but there are so many others that we've not been able to touch upon during this conversation, including things like housing related issues, slums and slum redevelopment, and also metropolitan governance, which is a very important topic. So thank you so much, sir.
Enjoyed the conversation.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.